So we are starting a new series on Jonah. We've read Jonah chapter 1. It's kind of a bit of a struggle to think it's Mother's Day. Jonah 1 doesn't even mention Jonah's mother. It mentions his dad, not his mother. So it's a bit of difficult to make the connection. I'm not a mother, but I have a mother, and I'm married to a mother, which means Mother's Day is a part of my life. When you meet someone and start a relationship with them, you don't necessarily think, I'm going to have to buy cards every Mother's Day for this person for a few years. When I remember when I first saw Ruth, I was at university, I was in my second year, she was in her first year. I was helping at Freshers Week at the Christian Union stall, and she came and asked questions. I remember seeing her for the first time and thinking, being struck by how pretty I thought she was, and so I set my gaze on her, and this is probably the most unbelievable thing you will hear all day. But at first, she was not interested in me. You'll probably struggle. I'll just pause, let that give you a second to get over that. But yeah, that's true. But I wore her down eventually. Valentine's Day, I think, I'm not really a big fan of Valentine's Day. I don't really think Valentine's Day is the time for love. I think Easter is the time for love. We're heading towards Easter. And Easter is essentially, I think, a love story. Why not? Because it's a story of God who pursues his heart's desire, who, despite their lack of interest, and pays the ultimate price to win them. Now, it took me about a month, 6 weeks, to win Ruth over. But it took God the life of his son to show us exactly how much he loves us, how committed he is to us. One time, for our 8th anniversary, Ruth and I, after we were married, Ruth and I decided we weren't going to buy each other gifts. We were going to make gifts for one another. I don't know if any of you have ever, it's not a good idea. I wouldn't recommend it generally. And I decided what I would do for her was I would bake some brownies, which may not sound very exciting, but this was before the kitchen was like a foreign territory to me at this point in our relationship. So it was quite a big thing for me to do, to bake some brownies. And of course, the plus side, I like brownies too. So I still have the recipe I used to bake those brownies. And one of the things about that recipe is it asks for two teaspoons of vanilla essence. And I've noticed over the years, as I've done more baking and so on, that a lot of recipes ask for vanilla essence. And it's quite a strange thing, I think, because you're not making a vanilla cake or a vanilla biscuit or a vanilla slice. But whatever it is, put a bit of vanilla in there. The sort of general feeling, I think, amongst bakers is that a bit of vanilla is good in everything, even when it comes to baking anyway. And this might seem like a strange thing to be talking about in a sermon on Jonah, but it's probably not the strangest thing you'll hear today. We're starting a new series on the book of Jonah, a story that will be familiar to many of you. Many of you will know this story about Jonah. I'm not going to recap the story and spoil the surprise for those of you who don't know it, but we've heard chapter 1, the first part of the story, where Jonah is called by God to go, and he runs and eventually ends up being swallowed by a great fish. That's one of the things that makes Jonah an odd story, the whole giant fish thing. But what is probably odd about this is that this book, Jonah, is our Easter series. We're going to be looking at Jonah over the next 4 weeks, and 4 weeks from today is Easter Sunday. So Easter Sunday, we're going to be looking at the final chapter of Jonah, and that might seem like an odd choice for a book to be going through over the Easter period. Well, Barton, the point is that Easter is our vanilla essence. We shouldn't really be baking anything in our lives without that splash of vanilla. And I don't mean by that we need to be, talking necessarily about the cross and the resurrection every second. What I mean is we need to let the Easter story be the flavour of our lives. We need to remember every second of every day that we are a people crucified with Christ who will share in the glory of his resurrection. That should be the essence of our lives. That should be the taste, the flavour of our lives. Every thought and every action should have an element of that in it. Because the Easter story is the story of a God who sends his Son to die for those he loves and to be raised from the dead to show his ultimate victory over death and the forces of evil. It's a theme that you can taste throughout the whole Bible. Once you get used to that flavour, once you get that flavour on your tongue, you'll find it everywhere in the Bible. And so it needs to be in us too. Easter is a love story. And the book of Jonah, with its giant fish and everything, that's a love story too. The very first verse we read, God spoke to Jonah. And the second verse, we see this. God sees a problem, a sin problem in this city called Nineveh and says, I need to do something about that. I need to do something about that. I need to send someone to do something about that. Nineveh was a big city. In fact, I think it was more like four smaller cities made into one giant city. And we might hear a bit more about Nineveh as a place in a couple of weeks when we get to chapter 3. But this is not a city in Israel. This is the heart of the Assyrian Empire. This is not a city of God's people. This is a city of people who don't know God. In fact, not just don't know God, but are actively opposed to God and his people. This is a city like that. Why does God care about what they're doing, what they're up to? Why does God show any interest in what's happening in Nineveh? It's not like they're his people. It's not like he's given them a law and they're breaking it, so he needs to step in. Why does he even care what they're doing or what they get up to? Well, as Jonah tells the sailors when they wake him up and say, who are you? What are you doing? What God do you worship? As Jonah says to them, I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land. I think it's strange of Jonah maybe to be running from God, trying to get away from God, all the while at the same time saying, I worship a God who made every inch of the planet. I worship the God whom all of this belongs to. And in the same way, every single person comes under God's care. He made everyone. And what is Easter, if not a declaration that the most high God of heaven, who created the sea and the lands, looks at every single person in history and says, I think they are worth the life of my son. Even Nineveh, even them. God cannot help but seek and save the lost. That's what he does. A city of people doing evil things who have no relationship with God, and yet God cares and says, I need to address this situation. Even if they don't know, they need it addressed. What's the flavour of that? What can you taste that? Tastes like Easter to me. It's the flavour of Easter, hundreds of years before Jesus was even born. This is why the evangelism team we have go out and stand on the street corners in places like Canterbury and Faversham. This is why Bonner and Felix are going to Albania. This is why throughout centuries, millennia, Christians have never felt quite right thinking, well, my faith is just a private thing between me and God. Because this is what God has been doing since the beginning. Seeking and saving the lost. Even when they don't know they need it. When I read this passage in Jonah, the way my mind works, maybe some of you have a similar kind of mind, but I see in this passage, something in this passage, I thought this is really interesting. There's a parallel here with something that happens in the life of Jesus. Maybe some of you caught it, maybe some of you didn't. That's fine. I'm going to take you through it now. Is when I was reading this moment where a storm comes and we're told, but Jonah, he's asleep beneath the deck. And the captain goes to him and wakes him up and says, what are you doing? What are you doing? How can you sleep? Why don't you care what's happening to us? Well, when I read that, it made me think of something. Maybe some of you may have caught that same idea. It's the same thing. We find the same thing in the Gospels. We find a story where Jesus and the disciples get on a boat to sail across the lake to the Gerasenes, and a storm comes. And where is Jesus? He is asleep below the deck. And the disciples go to him and wake him up and say, "Why? How can you sleep? Don't you care? Don't you care?" When you see things like this in the Old and the New Testament, when you see these kind of rhymes in Scripture, don't think, oh, that's just a coincidence. Don't ignore it. It's there for a reason. It means something. So I thought, well, what could possibly be happening here? And I read both stories and I thought, well, maybe it's this. Maybe because Jonah is called by God to go to Nineveh, a Gentile, non-Jewish city, and speak to them, bring the kingdom of God to them. And he runs, as we know, but I'm going to spoil the story a bit. He ends up at Nineveh. Okay, he gets there in the end, and he declares God's word to Nineveh. Jesus gets on a boat, not to run, but he's going to the Gerasenes, which is a pagan region, a non-Jewish Gentile region. And I wonder if, for some people, when they hear, certainly the disciples, Jesus' disciples, and other people, the early church maybe, when they hear about this, in the early church there was a lot of tension between Jews and Gentiles and what you needed to do to be a believer in Jesus. And I wonder if this story, when in the early church hears this story, and they hear about Jesus falling asleep below the deck when he's on his way to preach to Gentiles, it makes them think and realize that's exactly what happened to Jonah. Jesus is not the first person God sent to the Gentiles. It's not that the Gentiles have only just been of interest to God. God has been interested in the lost since the very beginning. This is what I mean about the flavour of Easter running throughout the whole Bible. It's quite amazing when you think about it. But there's something else in this chapter that I thought was quite amazing as well. Fred Craddock, who's a preacher I greatly admire and I'm often quoting, he tells a story about a woman at the church he was the minister of, and she was at everything. She would go to every service, every prayer meeting. She was very heavily involved. And he said to her one day, well, you should become a member of the church because you're here all the time. Why don't you become a member? He said, no, I don't want to become a member. And he said, why don't you want to become a member? Why? And she said, well, I've noticed that after people become members, after people join the church, they don't get much attention. I'd rather not become a member. I'd rather stay a prospect. People show more attention, make more effort with me because I'm not a member. Now, I tried all kinds of things to get Ruth to see what was blatantly obvious and that I was the right guy for her. And I don't know if you've ever been in that situation. It's not, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. It was very much worth it, but I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. But there are some people, if you can believe this, some people for whom that whole thing is the whole point of a relationship. They enjoy the thrill of the chase. They enjoy pursuing someone, but when they turn the head, they kind of lose interest. Not really interested in the relationship, they enjoy the thrill of the chase. It's better for them to remain a prospect, for it to be a potential thing rather than a real relationship. Maybe sometimes we might feel a bit like our relationship with God can be a bit like that. At the beginning, it might seem exciting, interesting, new. This is amazing. But if you start a relationship with God, then very quickly you learn that it is what Eugene Peterson called a long obedience in the same direction. And it can become hard and difficult and not very interesting, not very exciting, hard to maintain. But God doesn't feel that way about his relationship with you. See, in chapter 1 in this story, we don't just read about how God is pursuing Nineveh. We read about how God pursues Jonah too. In the same way as I said, why does God care about what's happening with Nineveh? We might reasonably ask, why does God care about Jonah? Like, he's asked Jonah to do something. Jonah's very clearly made it clear that he's not interested. Why not move on, God? Why not just forget Jonah, find someone else who's actually interested. Find someone else who's obedient. Do you think that God, who Jesus says is like the father of a son, who has been away for years and returns, a shepherd who's got 100 sheep, loses one, leaves the 99 to go and find the rest, like a woman who loses a coin and turns the whole house upside down looking for it, the God who celebrates when he finds what is lost. Do you think that God loses interest in you once you're through the door? Do you think he stops caring? Do you think the God who thought you were worth the life of his son thinks now that you've made the commitment to him, you're worth less? You're not as precious. You're not as important. Do you think God gets bored with you? Do you think he takes his eyes off you? No, I'm looking, there's all those Ninevites out there who need my attention. I haven't really got much time for you anymore. Is that what you think God is like? Is that how you feel your relationship with God is? Jonah, I think, misjudges God here. He runs from God. The reason why he ran is very interesting. We'll get to that in chapter 4. But Jonah, I think, has misunderstood God. He's misunderstood something important here. What Jonah has misjudged is exactly how committed God is to him. How passionately interested God is in him. Maybe he thought, well, if I just make it very plain with my actions that I'm not interested, find someone else, God will do just that. Lose interest, go and find someone else. But he misjudged that the God who seeks and saves the lost, well, sometimes the lost are not in Nineveh. Sometimes the lost are right here. Sometimes the lost can be those who have followed him for years, who have given their lives to him, but have settled into a mundane, tired, effortless faith. Sometimes the lost can be sitting in a church like Barton week after week for years. Perhaps you have misjudged God. Perhaps you have misjudged God's desire, his hunger, his passion, his commitment for you. Perhaps you've lost sight of that. Perhaps you've not realized that God never tires of wanting to draw you close to him. And he will keep on going and going and going, even if you turn and run in the opposite direction. I'll tell you from my own experience and from Jonah's experience that all that happens if you keep running and running from God, well, you never end up anywhere nice. You'll probably find you get very, very wet and have to spend some time figuratively in the belly of a giant fish, till you end up on dry land once more. God chases Jonah across the sea. He'll do nothing less for you. He'll do nothing less for you. But the thing is, the relationship with God was never intended to be a one-sided thing anyway. Some of us drift away in our hearts. We lose our passion. We lose our zeal for God. We get disappointed because things don't go the way they want and they kind of just fizzle out. Well, I'll tell you this, it's not supposed to be like that. And I can tell you that if you feel like your relationship with God, the interest has waned and fizzled out, it's only waned on one side. It's only fizzled out on one side. Faith should not be a story of slumped shoulders, shuffling feet, hands in the pocket. It should be full of Easter flavour. Sometimes the journey is slow and hard, but you can always have that Easter hope at its heart. If you find yourself in a rut, in a place where you feel you're far from God, whether it's because, over time you've slowly drifted away, or whether, like Jonah, you've turned tail and bolted, it doesn't matter. You can't shake him off that easily. He'll pursue you. He won't lose interest. He'll remain committed to you until you realise that there's no point running. You never end up anywhere good. Easter is a story where we hear about how God became flesh and put himself in our hands, and we killed him. But every Easter we get the chance in this Lent period to wake up every morning and say, God, I'm going to put myself in your hands. I'm going to turn towards you rather than away from you. So maybe I'll just ask you to do that over this Lent period and the next 4 weeks as we come towards Easter. Every morning, start the day by saying, God, I know you want to be involved in my life. I know you want to be close to me, and I want to be involved in your life too. So I put myself in your hands today. Let's go to Nineveh and see what happens.